set here. Will you kill that for that? I'm gonna talk before I work too. That little old lady he talked about, Margaret, as she was, her and a few other ladies were raising awareness and funds for this in the early '80s. They visited a number of local schools and told kids about it. She visited my school, I think it was the second grade, might have been the third grade, and told us about the place. And I've always loved history. I told my mom about the place, and she brought me up here. I think I was 8, and they were. John was probably here. I'm guessing there was a whole bunch of people here working on it. And I remember at the time that the ladies had a bunch of pictures upstairs.
Yeah, they did.
Being up there.
Margaret was quite a historian.
Yes.
Yes. A lot of what you see in Vancouver Historical Society, Margaret had a lot to do with that because she was born at the bottom of Lake Merwin, and she said the house is still there. And she always told me that, you know, my mom left her marble tables down there too, so if they ever drain that lake, you go get those marble tops.
From the hill behind my place, she could see the contour of the lake and point out where her house was.
Yeah, I know right where it is.
And then, 15 years later, I moved a mile up the creek. He mentioned our annual cider pressing. Well, that first year I lived here, my living room was the schoolhouse in the 1890s, so I have some really old apple trees. And I decided one weekend in October I was going to make me some apple juice, and bought a little juiceman and spent 4 hours making 4 gallons of juice, and I did not have a good time. That thing clogged up over and over, and well, then that following Wednesday our weekly paper came out, and on the front page there was an article about at the same time I was making that 4 gallons of juice, a mile down the road they squeezed 8,000 pounds of apples. And I buried that juiceman in the back end of the cupboard, and it didn't get pulled out for another decade when it got thrown away. And I came down here the next weekend, and there was a little sign that said, if you want to volunteer, just let us know. And George Fountain was here.
Yeah.
At the time. I held it up and walked up to George and pointed to myself, and he put his arm around me and brought me over to Fred and said, "Fred, look what I found." And Fred looked me up and down and said, "By George, I think you found a keeper." And that was 23 years ago.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough. Older fellows did all the hard work. I was able to get in on the restoration of the sheds front and back when we got here. And one of the first things they were getting ready to put the front shed on, so there was a ladder going down, and this front corner of the foundation didn't go down to bedrock. So we're digging out underneath it and building forms down to bedrock. And I worked down there with Fred, and my 6-year-old son was down there. And Fred loves history and loves teaching so well that he explained to my 6-year-old how to build the forms and how to measure it over the rock. Then the next week when I brought my wife down to show her what we were doing, my 6-year-old was able to explain to her exactly how to do it all. And I was like, I have nothing to add. He got it down. And I fell in love with Fred. He's taught me a ton. And it's been a pleasure working beside him. I've learned some blacksmithing with him. We've torn apart a 140-year-old machine and made some improvements on it, and that's kind of thrills me. But enough about me. Let's talk about our machine. This is an underrunning burr mill, meaning the lower stone is the runner, the one that's moving. put grain in the hopper. It goes through a little mouse hole in the back, drops through the mouse hole onto the shoe. Like most shoes, it has a tongue. I call it the mother-in-law's tongue because it wags so much. There's flat spots on the shaft right here, and the tongue rests against that. And when that spins, those flat spots causes the shaking action, causes the grain to drop down through the eye of the stone. Right down here, there's a little wheel that sits at one end of a teeter-totter with that lower stone on the other. Once I start dropping grain in, I lower that end of the teeter-totter to raise the stone. How much I raise it decides what comes out. I can crack corn if you're wanting to make some white lightning, or I can make you cornmeal or corn flour. The same with grain. I can crack you some breakfast cereal, or I can make you flour by adjusting the stones. When I'm milling the hard bread flour, the clearance between the stones is about the thickness of a piece of tissue paper.
Wow.
And it's actually, the grain is acting as a lubricant, keeping the stones from touching. So you'll notice as soon as I quit feeding grain in there, I'll lower the stones, otherwise my stones will start touching. This mill is capable of about 650 pounds an hour. We've done over 600 an hour. The time someone donated a ton of grain to the local food bank and they brought it here for us to mill. But
Are the stones, did the stones go back to 1876?
yes, yeah.
Same stones?
Well, this mill is actually not from here. This comes from Malino, Oregon. But based off this address here, I've researched that this company changed addresses like a half dozen times over 50 years. And this one was used from 1874 to 1878. So this was brand new technology when this was built. As for the stones themselves, they go back 4,000 to 4 million years, depends on what science you believe. They're out of the Paris Valley of France. They're a sedimentary rock. They have little fossils in them. They have little air bubbles in them. And because of that, it gives you more cutting surfaces, and it helps cool. They don't glaze over and get hot, and they don't break off. It's the Cadillac of millstones. You've heard the term, the sun never sets on the British Empire? They used to fill their ships full of this type of stone for ballast, send it out to their colonies, unload the stone, load it back with usually lumber, back to the mother country, and then there would be masons that would form the stones in the mills in the different colonies. So you'll find this type of stone all around the world. When the food bank brought it, we weren't able to mill everything up for them because they didn't bring enough bags. I've learned from experience, you bring me a 5-gallon bucket of wheat, I make 6.5 to 7 gallons of flour. That overage would be the miller's portion. I would fill your bucket back up and I would heap the extra, and that would be my payment. Because back then they didn't have cash and out, it was all trade. And then I would usually have a deal with a local mercantile or something to sell off my product. I heard the most successful guy here actually raised hogs, and he fed his portion of hogs and shipped them downriver to Portland. But, yeah, we were only able to do about half of it, filled up their bags, and they had to go get more containers so we could mill the rest. Yeah. Any questions at all about the history of the place, how it works, what color of trees we have outside? I ask that question, I get random questions about who knows what sometimes. It's all right, I'm fine with discussing anything.
How do you dress the stones?
What was that?
How do you dress the stones?
Hammer and chisel. Although we kind of want to, but are you familiar with Bob's Red Mill?
Yeah.
Bob's been out here when we've had this apart, and he's looked at it, and he says our stones are perfectly fine. They don't need dressed at all. Yeah. it, how do I say, I need to lower the stones when I quit putting grain in so they don't touch. If they touch, that's wearing them out. Could I say I'm undressing the stones when I'm doing that? There's actually, a little northeast of San Francisco, there's a Vail State Park, where there's a Vail Grist Mill. And there's a fella there who knows how to dress stones. He's known nationwide. We've actually talked about wishing we could have him out here. We don't have no use for him. Our stones don't need dressed. He will travel to any mill, bring an extra set of tools to leave with us, and give us a demonstration on how to hand dress the stones. I would like to finish putting that one together. That's been a decades-long project that maybe I'll get completed some year. Like that top metal there wasn't, another member made the wood. I took this one apart and took this to a Silverton foundry, and they used this as a mold to cast that top. That top's only 10 years old now. That's how long I've been working on that project. Maybe one day I'll get there and get that guy out here.
Are those other stones over there?
Yes, that's a match set to what's in here. That upright one, I weigh 353 pounds. I think I can't see the number on the side of it. And
353, you're good.
and then the lower stone with the collar that's leaning up weighs 295. I got tired of people asking me what they weigh, and I wrestled that up on the scale one day. That's probably why my back is still messed up. That's a beast. Any other questions?
Yeah, if you're changing grains, how do you clean it? Or does it,
We just let it run for a little bit until we call it dusting it out. You just keep going until product quits coming. There is some cross-contamination. That's why we have people with severe gluten allergies. Some say, okay, I'll just have the corn. Well, there's still flour in here, so there is the potential some of the flour dust is mixed in with your corn. So if you're that deadly afraid of gluten, don't touch our corn either.
yeah, Bob's Red Mill has a whole different section just for.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, he's a little bigger than we are.
What are your different grains in these, cans?
Oh, there's, yeah, I put some of the different grains in,
yeah.
like the hard red and the white wheat.
Mhm.
And then he's gonna grind.
One's a hard red, one's a soft white. I bet you can probably tell which is which. Okay. The hard red is a bread flour. The soft white is a pastry flour. There's proteins convert to gluten. Gluten reacts with yeast to give you your rice. So if you have a grain that's lower in protein, there's not as much gluten, which means there's not as much for the yeast to react with to give you your rice. So consider that a pastry flour, good for pancakes, biscuits, cookies, biscuits, pie noodles, pie crusts, biscuits. Give you a guess what my favorite is. and have the flour. So it's a yeast and non-yeast, basically. And then we have this common field corn. We've milled barley, a half dozen other different types of wheat, milled rice. We've had various people bring in their own stuff, like I've learned Mormons are supposed to keep a year's worth of food stuff stored up. We used to have Mormon families show up with a 5-gallon bucket every couple months. There's agricultural college up by Olympia. They used to grow their own crop every year and come down like a 30-pound bag and have a tour every fall. Just enough that they had a big pancake feed. So if you you happen to grow your own, we will mill it for you. Any other questions, or do I need to get to work?
When it was in operation, how far away would the grains be coming from? I mean, your recent talk was about someone has a 5-gallon bucket with it.
Yeah.
But when it was doing its thing,
Well, to the south, I would say the furthest they came was about 8 miles, because the nearest mill was about 14 miles to the south. So you didn't have a favorite back then. You were pulling a wagon, you went to whoever was closest. But to the east, there was nobody up in Shalashie and stuff out there. If there was any mill that direction, I know there were people across the river that brought it, so. I don't know, was there another mill in Woodland? I've never heard of one.
Never heard of one. Now you'd have to go out toward the coast to find another mill. There's something, as you went out toward the coast range and through there, some of those small towns had mills.
Well, this was originally built in 1876. The one I speak of wasn't built till 1883, so to begin with, didn't have it. The one built in 1883 was actually my great-great-great-grandfather. I wonder what he would think if he knew I was working for his competitor.
You ready to roll?
Yeah. Turn me on, John.
You already got corn in there?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even see you do that.
As easy as that. Why did you make it there? I like my cornmeal pretty fine, so I go on the fine side unless someone tells me to do otherwise.